Chapter 1 Childhood Saga. I was 12 years old when I set myself on fire. 11 when I stole a rope from a man who needed it to feed his family. 15 when I dropped out of 10th grade. Because by then, I'd already learned more from my mistakes than any teacher could cram into my skull. My name's Alfred Ronnie Haines, though everyone called me Ronnie back then. I was the kind of kid who couldn't sit still, couldn't shut up, couldn't stop my hands from reaching for things that weren't mine. Not because I was mean or stupid. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just had this engine inside me that wouldn't quit. This hunger to touch everything, try everything, break everything open to see what was inside. The world outside those classroom windows wasn't just calling to me. It was howling, and I couldn't ignore it. So I answered. And yeah, I paid for it. In skin grafts and shame and nights I couldn't sleep because I kept seeing the look on people's faces when they realized what I'd done. Those mistakes carved lessons into me that no textbook could touch. Some things you could learn from books. Others you learn from fire licking up your leg, from rope burning through your hands, from standing in front of a grown man whose livelihood you just stole, searching for words that don't exist because nothing you say will ever make it right. This is what I learned. This is what it cost. The Playground Adventure. My brother Ricky was 2 years younger than me. I was 5, he was 3, still in diapers. We were playing in the backyard one day when I asked him, "You want to go on the swings and slides?" He looked at me and smiled, but I don't think he really understood what I was getting at. We lived on Maxwell Road, and the elementary school playground was about a mile away on Harris Street. Being the smart problem child I was, I figured out a shortcut, straight down the railroad tracks that cut through the city of Carlton. So, without telling anyone where we were going, I took Ricky's hand, and we headed out. We walked down Maxwell Road, past Ann Street, then hopped onto the railroad tracks and headed northeast. We followed the tracks to Harris Street, turned left, past Kent Street, and there it was, the playground. Swings, slides, monkey bars, the whole setup. The entire way there, I kept pulling Ricky's diaper back up while he chanted, "Swings, swings, swings." We played there for another 2 hours, not knowing my mother had called the cops and said she thought someone kidnapped us. The whole neighborhood was looking for us. I heard the siren and thought we'd better head back. We started walking on the tracks headed west. Ricky was crying and wanted to stop, but I kept pulling him to walk as we went. We almost got to Maxwell Road when the police spotted us, and 2 officers ran to get our little asses off the railroad tracks as a diesel engine was blowing its horn about a quarter mile away. One of the officers, my Uncle Dwight, grabbed Ricky as I jumped off the tracks. A few moments later, the train went flying by us. I knew I was in deep shit. I was grounded for a week. That was the first time I learned that adventures had consequences. It wouldn't be the last. Finding a rope. I just turned 11 when one day, my cousin Orrin, who lived across the road from me, was playing in the woods about a quarter mile east of my house. I got the bright idea that if we found some rope, we could swing through the trees like Tarzan in the movies. I knew exactly where to get one. Bill Bailey, who lived in the next house north of mine, removed trees for a living, and he had an old rope lying in his backyard. It looked worthless to me, so I figured I'd borrow it. Bill would never miss it. Or so I thought. Orrin and I headed to the woods the next day and cut the rope into 3 or 4 pieces, tying them between trees. We spent hours swinging from tree to tree, making Tarzan calls and having the time of our lives. A couple days later, I was in the basement when I heard heavy footsteps on the porch above me. Then Bill's voice, loud and angry, boomed through the floorboards. My stomach tightened. I froze, straining to hear. "Where is he?" he demanded. My mother's muffled response was followed by her sharp voice, "Ronnie, get up here right now." My heart started hammering. What have I done now? I climbed the basement stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. my mind racing. The rope. Oh God, the rope. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. At the top of the stairs, I glanced toward the front door and saw them. Flashing blue lights painting our driveway in rhythmic pulses. The Carlton police. My legs went weak. This wasn't just trouble. This was serious. I walked toward the door, my mouth dry, my hands trembling. Bill stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light. When I got close enough, he locked eyes with me, a hard, piercing stare that went straight through me. My face went hot. I knew what this was about. "I know you took my rope," Bill said, his voice low and controlled, which somehow made it worse. "You left tracks dragging it back to your place." My voice came out small and pathetic. "It was just an old rope. I didn't think you needed it." Bill's jaw clenched. "I used that rope to make money. Where is it?" "We left it in the woods behind Oren's house," I stammered. "You need to show me now." Bill turned to the police car. "Go get Oren." The walk to the woods felt like a death march. My legs shook the whole way. Bill didn't say a word, just walked beside me in this terrible silence that made my chest tight. I kept hoping maybe it wouldn't be so bad, that we would just give the rope back. When we reached the trees where we'd been playing, Bill stopped. He stared at his rope, cut into pieces, tied around branches, frayed and ruined. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then Bill exploded. "You cut my rope up?" His voice cracked like thunder through the woods. "It's worthless. Completely worthless." His face went red, the veins in his neck bulging. He grabbed one of the pieces and held it up, shaking it. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I wanted to disappear into the ground. My whole body felt cold and hot at the same time. The Carlton City police officer stepped forward. "Bill, what was the rope worth?" "About $90, Bill spat. $90. The numbers hit me like a freight train. That was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. One of the officers was Dwight Haines, my uncle. He cleared his throat. "Bill, if these boys are willing to pay you back, would you drop the charges?" Bill stood there, breathing hard, staring at the ruined rope in his hands. The silence stretched forever. Finally, he looked at me and Oren with pure disgust. "Yes," he said slowly, "but they better scrape up the money fast." He pointed a thick finger at us. "And I'm taking your bikes if I don't see some money soon." My bike. The thought of losing it made my eyes sting. Behind Bill, the police turned their heads and grinned. Oren and I agreed to pay $45 each. $45 might as well have been $1,000. I didn't get an allowance. I didn't have a job. I had maybe $3 to my name, saved up from birthday cards and change I'd found. The math was impossible, and it sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold, and always there. Every morning I'd wake up and just for a second I'd forget. Then it would hit me all over again. The debt, Bill Bailey's red face, that thick finger pointing at me. My throat would close up, and something cold would spread through my chest, staying there all day. I couldn't stop thinking about my bike. It leaned against the garage every afternoon when I got home from school, and I'd stand there looking at it, my throat tight. What if today was the day Bill came for it? What if I walked home tomorrow and it was just gone, taken, because I couldn't come up with the money fast enough? That bike was everything. It was freedom. It was how I got to my friends' houses, how I explored the woods, how I felt like I had some control over my own life. The thought of Bill Bailey loading it into his truck, of never seeing it again, made me feel sick and small and powerless. I started scrounging for every penny I could find. I collected pop bottles from ditches and returned them for the deposit, 2 cents each, which meant I needed to find hundreds of them. I knocked on neighbors' doors asking if they had any work, raking leaves, pulling weeds, anything. Mrs. Henderson paid me 50 cents to clean out her garage. My grandfather gave me $1 for mowing his lawn, and I nearly cried with relief. I kept the money in an old coffee can under my bed. Every night I'd count it. $3.17, $5.42, $8.90. The numbers climbed so slowly it felt like torture. 2 weeks in, I saw Bill Bailey's truck coming down our road. My heart stopped. I was in the front yard and there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. He slowed down as he passed our house, and our eyes met through his window. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked at me. A long, hard look that said, "I haven't forgotten," and kept driving. I stood there shaking after he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if he came tomorrow? What if I didn't get the money in time? The weight of it pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. This wasn't like getting grounded or yelled at. This was real. This was adult consequences for a stupid kid mistake, and there was no way out except to somehow, impossibly, come up with $45. And then I got an idea. The Spinning Wheel Game Room. In the basement, there was a small room off to the side, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Most people would have seen it as storage space or left it empty. I saw opportunity. I set it up over a few days, card table from the garage, an old wooden chair, some crates for the prizes. The centerpiece was a carnival-style spinning wheel I'd gotten my hands on, faded red and yellow wedges with numbers around the rim. The prizes were the key. I arranged them on the crates: toy cars, comic books, candy bars, bubble gum I'd bought in bulk with my barrel ride money, a pocket knife, some marbles in a leather pouch, and right in the center, positioned so you couldn't miss it, a small wooden crossbow with a leather grip and real tension in the string. It wasn't a toy. It could actually shoot. I knew that crossbow would be the draw. Every kid who saw it would want it. The rules were simple. 2 cents a spin. Land on certain numbers, you won certain prizes. The bubble gum was easy to win. I'd rigged about half the wheel to land on those. The better prizes had smaller, harder to hit numbers. And the crossbow? That was nearly impossible. Number 7, the thinnest wedge on the whole wheel. Word spread fast. Within a few days, I had a steady stream of customers. Kids showing up with pennies clutched in their fists, eyes wide when they saw the prize display. But it was David who became obsessed. David Bailey, Bill Bailey's son. The same Bill Bailey who had my bike locked up in his garage. The same Bill Bailey I owed $45 to. And here was his kid, standing in my basement, digging through his pockets for pennies. David was stocky with a crew cut and a stubborn streak a mile wide. The first time he came down those basement stairs and saw the crossbow, he stopped dead in his tracks. "How much to win that?" he asked, pointing. 2 cents a spin. You gotta land on 7. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a handful of pennies. "Let me try." I took his 2 cents and gave the wheel a spin. It clacked around. Tick, 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 tick. The sound echoing off the concrete walls. The pointer slowed, hovering near the 7 for just a moment before settling on 12. "Bubble gum," I said, handing him a small package. David barely looked at it. Again. He went through 8 cents that first day, but I could see it in his face, that determination, that certainty that the next spin would be the one. He came back the next day with 16 cents, 8 more tries. By the 3rd spin, other kids had gathered to watch, pressing into the small space. The air was thick and musty, smelling of damp earth and old cardboard. The single bulb cast harsh shadows that made the crossbow seem to shift and gleam. "Come on, 7, David muttered as the wheel slowed. It landed on 3, a marble pouch. His jaw tightened. The 7th spin came so close. The pointer trembled right on the line between 7 and the wedge next to it. My stomach did a little flip. If he won the crossbow, I'd lose my best prize. But the pointer settled on the other side, number 14. David stood there for a long moment, his pile of prizes scattered on the table in front of him. His pennies were gone. The crossbow sat on its crate, untouched. "I'll be back," he said quietly. "I'm going to get more money, and I'm going to win that thing." He came back 3 more times that week, each time with fresh pennies, each time walking away empty-handed, except for consolation prizes. I started to feel a little guilty. Not guilty enough to stop, but guilty enough that I'd avoid his eyes when he left. The crossbow stayed on that crate for weeks, drawing kids in, keeping them spinning. I kept all my earnings in a glass jar in my room, watching the pennies pile up. I was learning something about business. People will keep trying if they think they're close, even when they're not. The crossbow made me more money than anything else, and it never left the crate. The game wasn't about winning. It was about the possibility of winning. That's what kept them coming back. Paying off my debt. It took me a little over 3 weeks to raise the money. When I finally had $45, counted and recounted 3 times to make sure, I walked next door to Bill Bailey's house, my hands sweating, holding the money with a firm grip. He answered the door and looked down at me. I held out the crumpled bills and loose change, my voice barely working. "Here's the $45, I said. He took it without counting it, without saying thank you. He just nodded once and said, "Don't ever touch my things again." "I won't," I whispered. He closed the door. I walked home with my legs shaking, but for the first time in weeks, I could breathe all the way in. The bike was mine again. The debt was paid. Learning the truth. I thought I'd learned my lesson. Weeks later, David mentioned it casually. That rope I'd found in his backyard. The one Orrin and I had been using to play Tarzan. It was already rotting when we found it, old and frayed, worthless for his dad's tree service, worthless for anything. Bill Bailey had known it too. That's why it was lying in the yard in the first place. David said it like it was nothing, like it was obvious, like everyone knew. I stood there in his driveway, everything inside me going cold. The rope was trash. Bill had thrown it out. And when he caught me with it, when I stood there terrified, ready to accept any punishment, he didn't just take it back. He saw an opportunity, a scared kid who didn't know any better, who'd do anything to make it right. So, he invented a number, $45, for garbage. I thought about those 3 weeks, every penny I'd scraped together, the weight of that debt sitting on my chest every morning when I woke up, the spinning wheel, the crossbow on the crate, the kids I'd kept coming back for one more try, the way my hand shook when I handed him that money, the way he took it without even counting it, like it was nothing. Because to him, it was nothing. Just 45 easy dollars off an 11-year-old who thought he was learning about responsibility. Bill Bailey had looked me in the eye, taken my $45 for a rope that wasn't worth $5, and closed the door without a word. And I'd walked away thinking I'd learned something about honor. I had learned something, just not what I thought. The Pig Rodeo. My dad was raising several pigs in the back lot behind our house, a sprawling piece of land where he'd planted over 100 evergreen trees in neat rows. The trees were still young, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, their branches dense and scratchy. They created a maze of green corridors that stretched all the way back to my grandfather John Harwood's property line. His house sat right there at the edge, close enough that you could hear him working in his yard or smell whatever Grandma was cooking for dinner. The pigs had the run of the place. They'd root around behind the trees, grunting and snuffling, their pink bodies weaving through the evergreens like they owned the world. It started as a joke, really. One afternoon, a few neighborhood kids were over, and we were watching the pigs when Orrin said, "Bet you can't ride one." Bet I can, I shot back. The first pig I tried to mount squealed like I'd stabbed it and took off running before I could even get my leg over. I landed face first in the dirt while everyone howled with laughter. But I wasn't about to let that be the end of it. Watch this, I said, wiping the dirt off my face. I picked a smaller pig, approached slowly, then lunged. This time I got on, wrapping my arms around its thick body, warm and solid and reeking of mud and manure, and something sour that made my eyes water. My legs squeezed tight against its sides, feeling the coarse bristles dig into my inner thighs through my jeans. The pig's skin was hot and slick with sweat beneath those wiry hairs. The pig exploded into motion, squealing bloody murder, a high-pitched shriek that echoed across the lot and probably carried all the way to Grandfather's house. It zigzagged between the evergreen trees, and suddenly I was in a war zone of green. The branches whipped at my face and arms, sharp needles scratching lines across my skin, leaving stinging welts. Pine sap stuck to my hands where I gripped the pig's bristly hide. The smell of crushed evergreen mixed with pig stink as we crashed through the maze, the pig's hooves thundering against the packed dirt. "Hold on!" someone shouted behind me. The pig had one strategy: run straight for the low-hanging branches and scrape me off like a burr. It worked. An evergreen branch caught me square in the chest, and I went flying backward, landing hard on my back. The pig trotted away, snorting with what I swear was satisfaction. "My turn!" David yelled, already chasing another pig. Pretty soon we all took turns, competing to see who could stay on longest. The pigs would squeal and run, we'd hold on for dear life, and the evergreens would eventually knock us off. I got good at it, really good. I learned to lean low, to anticipate when the pig would dart toward a tree, to shift my weight and steer them away from the branches. I could stay on longer than anyone. One afternoon, I mounted on one of the bigger pigs, a hefty one that Dad called Hoss. The moment I was on, Hoss took off like a shot, squealing at the top of his lungs. But instead of heading for the trees, he made a beeline straight for the back of the lot, toward Grandfather's house. "Whoa, whoa!" I yelled. But Hoss wasn't listening. The pig ran right up the property line, squealing so loud I thought the whole neighborhood could hear. I held on, laughing and hollering, my hands buzzing with the thrill of it. That's when I saw Grandfather standing in his yard, leaning on his rake. He was watching us with this huge grin on his face, shaking his head. "You boys are gonna keep those pigs skinny," he called out laughing. "They'll never fatten up with all this running around." "Sorry, Grandpa," I yelled back, still clinging to Hoss as the pigs circled back toward the evergreens. It became a regular thing. The pigs would squeal, we'd ride them toward Grandfather's house, and he'd stand there laughing, making jokes about how we were ruining Dad's livestock. He never told us to stop. I think he enjoyed the show. But the squealing carried. One afternoon, I was showing the other kids how to stay low and grip tight when Dad's voice cut through the noise. "Ronnie?" Everything inside me went cold. Then he was at the edge of the lot, arms crossed, face dark. The kids scattered. I slid off the pig. "You think those pigs are toys?" Dad's voice was quiet, dangerous quiet. "Your grandfather told me what's been going on." So, Grandfather had told him. He'd been laughing, sure, but he'd also been watching. "No more pig riding," Dad said. "You understand me?" "Yes, sir." Most of my adventures ended like that, with a lecture, maybe some punishment, but nothing permanent. I'd push the boundaries, get caught, walk away with nothing worse than a bruised ego or a sore backside. But not all of them. Caution using gasoline. One day my dad was burning trash next to the driveway. There was a slope there, only a couple feet from the top down to where the burn pile sat. I stood watching him build the fire, mesmerized by his routine. He'd gather sticks, pile them up, pour gasoline over the wood, then step back and toss a match from a safe distance. The pile would explode into flames, a sudden whoosh of heat and light. I thought it was the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen. I was roasting a marshmallow when Dad said he needed to run inside for something. "Ronnie, be careful and keep an eye on the fire," he told me. "Okay, Dad," I said, watching my marshmallow turn golden brown. By the time I finished that marshmallow and reached for another, the fire had died down to nothing but hot ashes glowing in the pile. I knew exactly what to do. I'd watched Dad do it several times. I went to the garage and found a small pail, poured some gasoline into it, and headed back. As I walked, some of the gasoline sloshed out and soaked into my shorts on the right side. I didn't think much of it. I was focused on recreating that explosion of flame I'd seen Dad make. Standing at the top of the slope, I did what I'd seen him do. I threw the gasoline from the bucket toward the ashes below. But the gasoline didn't just land on the ashes. It dripped and splashed, leaving a trail all the way from where I stood down to the pile. The ashes ignited instantly, and the fire followed the gasoline trail right back to me. For one frozen heartbeat, I watched the flame race up the slope toward me, a bright orange line moving faster than anything I'd ever seen, faster than thought itself. My brain couldn't catch up to what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Dad never. Then the fire reached my shorts. Everything became pain. It wasn't like touching a hot stove or burning your finger on a match. This was different. Alive, hungry, eating through fabric and into flesh, in the space between one breath and the next. The heat was so intense, it felt cold at first, like my nerves couldn't process what was happening to them. Then they figured it out. The pain detonated across my right side, searing, white-hot, deeper than skin. I could feel it burrowing in, layer by layer, and there was a sound, a soft crackling hiss that I realized was me, my flesh, cooking. Then the smell hit, sweet and greasy and wrong, like meat left too long on a grill. And somewhere in my 12-year-old brain, I understood that I was smelling myself burn, and that knowledge was more terrifying than the pain. I screamed and ran, not away from anything or toward anything, just ran, because every instinct I had was shrieking that I had to move, had to escape, even though the fire was on me, part of me now, running with me. My legs pumped and the movement fanned the flames and made it worse, but I was pure panic now, all animal reflex, but running and screaming and feeling the fire eating me alive. David next door saw me running and started laughing. He thought it was a game. "I'm on fire!" I screamed, and my voice didn't sound like my voice. It was high and broken and animal. The pain was everything now. It had swallowed the world. There was nothing but burning and the desperate, clawing need to make it stop. Some instinct finally broke through the panic. Drop and roll, and I threw myself to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but I rolled anyway, thrashing in the grass, feeling the flames press against my body, and then finally smother out. I lay there in the grass, gasping, my heart slamming so hard against my ribs, I thought it might break through. The flames were gone, but the burning wasn't. My right side was screaming, a deep, relentless agony that pulsed with every heartbeat, like the fire had burrowed inside me and was still burning from the inside out. I wanted to chew my own skin off. I wanted to die. I wanted my mother. Then, a different kind of terror crashed over me, cold and sharp through the pain. Dad was going to kill me. I disobeyed him, played with gasoline, nearly burned myself alive. I had to hide what I'd done. I grabbed the bucket and ran it back to the garage, tucking it away where Dad kept it. Maybe he wouldn't notice. Maybe I could just... The pain flared again, sharp and insistent. I looked down at my shorts. The right side was completely black, charred and stuck to my skin. Without thinking, I pulled the fabric away from my body. My skin came with it. The scream that tore out of me was primal. I'd never experienced pain like this, white hot and all-consuming. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, could only scream and run. I burst through the back door into the kitchen, still screaming, and started running in circles around the kitchen table. My mother appeared, chasing after me, reaching for me, but I was moving on pure panic and adrenaline. "Ronnie, stop!" she shouted. She finally stopped moving and just stood there. I ran right into her. Her arms closed around me and she held me tight. "What's wrong? What happened? My side is burning," I sobbed. She pulled back and looked at the burn. Her face went white. "Oh my God!" Right then, I heard Dad's car pull into the driveway. Mom's head snapped toward the door. "We need to get him to the hospital," she said, her voice tight with urgency. My grandmother from next door, Iona Haines, my dad's mother, came running over. She must have heard my screaming from her house. She took one look at me and said firmly, "Everyone, give me a private moment with Ronnie." Mom hesitated, but Grandma's tone left no room for argument. Everyone filed out to the garage to wait. I was still screaming, the pain so intense I couldn't stop. Grandma leaned over me, her weathered face calm and focused. She began chanting in words I didn't recognize, strange, rhythmic sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. Her hands moved over my burn without touching it, tracing patterns in the air above my ruined skin. Then, she bent close and blew her breath across the wound. The pain didn't disappear, but it retreated. It went from unbearable to something I could almost stand. The relief was so sudden and unexpected that my screaming finally stopped, replaced by ragged, gasping breaths. Grandma straightened up and called toward the garage. "Get him to the hospital now." I didn't understand what had just happened, but I knew, with the absolute certainty that only a 12-year-old can have, that it was real. Whatever those words were, whatever she'd done, it had worked. At the hospital, the doctors took one look at my right side and their faces went grim. The burn had gone deep, 3rd degree, all the way down to bone. They admitted me immediately. 30 days. Every morning around 6, a nurse would come in to change my dressings. The gauze would stick to the raw flesh underneath, and when she peeled it away, the pain was so sharp and immediate that it gripped the bed rails until my knuckles went white. Sometimes I'd bite down on my lip hard enough to taste blood, just to have something else to focus on. Between the dressing changes, there was nothing but time. I'd replay that afternoon in my head over and over. The gasoline sloshing in the can, the match in my hand, the way I thought I was being so careful, so smart about it. Every single decision I'd made that led to that moment played on a loop I couldn't shut off. At night, when the hospital got quiet, that's when the shame really settled in. I'd lie there in the dark, my side throbbing despite the pain medication, and think about my mother's face when she saw the burn. The way it had gone white, the fear in her voice. I thought about my dad too, how he'd warned us, how he'd told us exactly what would happen if we kept messing around with fire and gasoline. And I'd nodded and said I understood, and then I'd gone right back out and done it anyway. The skin graft came in the 2nd week. They took a sheet of healthy skin from my right upper thigh and transplanted it to my side. When I woke up from the anesthesia, I had 2 wounds instead of 1, 2 places that screamed every time I moved. The donor site on my thigh was almost worse than the burn itself, a raw rectangle that felt like someone had taken a cheese grater to my leg. After that, I couldn't walk right for days. I'd shuffle to the bathroom, hunched over, moving like an old man. Every step pulled at the graft site sent fresh waves of pain radiating through my side. Mom came every day. She'd sit in the chair next to my bed and try to make conversation, try to keep things normal. But I could see the worry in her eyes, the exhaustion. She'd bring me comic books and magazines, things to pass the time, but I could barely focus on them. My mind kept circling back to the same place. I did this. This is my fault. 30 days to learn what consequences actually feel like when they're not just a word adults throw around. 30 days to understand that I'm sorry doesn't undo anything. 30 days of lying in that bed, watching my skin slowly knit itself back together, knowing that the scar would be there forever. A permanent reminder of the moment I thought I knew better than everyone who tried to warn me. You'd think a month in the hospital would have taught me to slow down, to think things through before acting. But within a week of getting home, I was already plotting my next move. Life went right back to normal, which meant my cousin Oren was back to his usual tricks, chasing me around with his BB gun and shooting me in the butt whenever he got the chance. I decided it was time for payback. The booby trap. I started digging a hole in our backyard, right behind my parents' bedroom window. It took me the better part of 2 days. I laid plastic down around the edges so I could scoop the dirt onto it, then carried away in loads to hide behind the evergreen trees on the next lot my dad owned. Every shovelful had to disappear without a trace. When I was done, I examined my work. The hole was perfect, about 3 feet deep, wide enough to swallow a running kid, and not a speck of dirt lying around to give it away. I inserted sticks across the opening to hold up the sod I'd carefully cut and placed back over the top. From above, it looked like undisturbed grass. You'd never know it was there unless you were looking for it. Ricky watched the whole operation, giggling every time I stepped back to admire my trap. He knew exactly what I was planning, and he was all in. We went across the street to get Oren. I put on my best casual voice. "Hey, Oren, I got a deal for you. If you can beat us to the dog coop in our backyard, I'll give you all my cars, the ones we play with in the sand." Oren smiled. He didn't really want the cars, but he couldn't resist a challenge. "You're on." "We gotta give Ricky a head start, though," I said. "He's younger." Oren shrugged. "Fine." Ricky took off running, and I was right behind him a second later. We tore across the street and into our yard. Ricky rounded the corner of the house and jumped clean across the trap, his little legs pumping. I glanced back. Oren was gaining ground fast, maybe 100 feet behind me and closing. I turned the corner and launched myself across the booby trap, landing hard on the other side. Oren didn't see either of us jump. He came around that corner at full speed, and the ground just opened up beneath him. He dropped straight into the hole, his stomach slamming into the far edge with a sickening thud. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and a second later, he was vomiting all over himself and the dirt walls of my perfect trap. Ricky and I didn't wait to see how mad he'd be. We'd bolted for the house and locked the door behind us, just as Oren dragged himself out of the hole. He came at the door like a wild animal, pounding on it, trying the handle, screaming that he was going to beat our asses. We stood on the other side of the glass, staring at him and laughing. He had vomit all down the front of his shirt, dirt smeared across his face, and murder in his eyes. Then he stopped. He just stopped, turned around, and walked away from the door. Ricky and I looked at each other. That seemed too easy. Oren went straight to the crawl space under the porch, the place where we spent hours playing with our toy cars in the sand, building little roads and houses, creating a whole miniature city. He got down on his hands and knees and crawled under there. We watched through the window as he systematically destroyed everything. He kicked over the sand buildings, stomped on the roads, and then, one by one, he buried every single car we owned. He took his time with it, making sure we could see exactly what he was doing. When he was finished, he crawled back out, stood up, and looked right at us through the window. Then he smiled, a real smile, not angry anymore, and walked home. Payback was complete, on both sides. The scholarship. After the booby trap incident, Dad was pissed about more than just the danger. I'd torn up half the backyard digging that hole, and the grass wasn't coming back. Grounded for a whole week. Again. I spent hours in my bedroom, bored out of my skull, flipping through a TV guide when I saw it. A contest from Art Instruction Inc. 3 drawings to copy: the pirate, Tippy the turtle, and Tiny the mouse. Win a scholarship, learn to be a real artist. The rules were clear: 16 years old or higher. I was 14. I drew the pirate anyway, filled out the form, lied about my age, mailed it in. About a month later, 2 men in suits rang our doorbell. I was in my room when I heard it. The formal knock, Mom's footsteps, the door opening. Then voices, adult voices, professional. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm here from Art Instruction Inc. Your son has won the scholarship." Everything inside me went cold. "Ronnie," Mom yelled, "come here right now. There's 2 men here that want to speak to you." I froze. My mind raced through every possible thing I could have done wrong, but I couldn't think of anything recent. Nothing that would bring men in suits to the door. Then it hit me. The drawing. I walked down the hall like I was heading to an execution. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I saw them. 2 men in press suits, briefcases, the whole deal. Professional, legitimate. And my mother standing there in her house clothes, confused, but trying to look presentable. One of the men looked at me, really looked at me. His smile faded just a little. "How old are you, son?" The question hung in the air. Mom's eyes snapped to me, suddenly alert. She knew that tone. She'd heard it before. The tone adults use when they already know the answer and they're just giving you a chance to come clean. Couldn't look at the men either. I stared at the floor. 14. Silence. Then one of them laughed. Not mean, just amused, like he'd seen this before. The other one shook his head, smiling. But Mom wasn't smiling. I could feel the heat coming off her, the embarrassment. These professional men in their suits, standing on our porch, and her son, her lying son, had wasted their time, made her look like she didn't know what was going on in her own house, made her look like a fool. "Ronnie!" Her voice was tight, controlled, the kind of controlled that meant I was in deep shit later. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, to her, to them, to everyone. One of the men patted my shoulder. "You've got talent, kid. Real talent. But the rules are there for a reason." He glanced at his partner, then back at me. "Try again when you're really 16, okay?" I nodded. They left. Mom closed the door and just stood there for a long moment, her back to me. When she finally turned around, she didn't yell, didn't lecture, just looked at me with this tired disappointment that made me feel smaller than any punishment could. "Go to your room." I went. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd try again in 2 years, that it was just a stupid drawing contest anyway. But sitting on my bed that afternoon, staring at the wall, I felt something I hadn't felt since Bill caught me with his rope. That sick weight in my stomach that comes from knowing you fucked up, knowing you hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and knowing there's no way to take it back. The difference was, this time I'd embarrassed my mother in front of strangers, made her look like she couldn't control her own kid, like she raised a liar. That should have been the lesson that stuck. It wasn't. Life lessons. At 17, I wrapped my first car around an oak tree at 90 miles per hour. The impact threw me forward so hard, the steering wheel cracked. I walked away with bruises that turned my chest purple for weeks, and all I could think about was how lucky I was, how I'd beaten the odds again. At 18, the Carlton police chased me on my Honda 450 Scrambler until I took it into the woods, where their cruiser couldn't follow. My breath came fast and shallow the whole time, but my hands stayed steady on the handlebars. I got fired from a job for fighting. He threw the first punch, and I finished it, cocky enough to think they needed me more than I needed them. The scars on my leg from the gasoline fire had faded to pale lines by then. I barely noticed them anymore. I thought that meant I'd healed. Really, it just meant I'd forgotten what the burning felt like. Every time I got away with something, every time I walked away from a wreck, or outran the cops, or took a hit and kept standing, it reinforced the same lesson. I could take it. Whatever came at me, I could absorb it and keep moving. That felt like being ready for the world. Then one afternoon, when I was 19, the mail came. My mother handed me the envelope without saying anything. It was thin, official-looking, with my full name typed across the front in all capitals. The return address said Selective Service System. My hands were steady when I opened it. I'd opened plenty of envelopes before, but something about the weight of the paper, the formal language, the way it addressed me like I was already someone else, made my chest go tight and cold. The letter was short. "Congratulations," it said. "You have been chosen to serve your country." Congratulations. Like I'd won something. Like this was an honor I should be grateful for. At the bottom, in printed text that somehow looked both impersonal and absolute, it said, "Richard M. Nixon, President of the United States." I stood there in the kitchen holding that piece of paper, and my hands started to shake. Not much, just enough that the words blurred slightly. I set it down on the counter and pressed my palms flat against the formica, trying to steady myself. Mom was watching me, not saying anything, just watching. I picked the letter back up, read it again. The words didn't change. My mouth had gone dry. I swallowed, but it didn't help. There was a taste like copper on my tongue, the same taste I'd had right before I threw up after the pig threw me into the fence post. The gasoline fire had taught me that burns heal, that you scream and you run and you go to the hospital, and then after a few days you can walk again. But I'd seen the news. I'd seen what napalm did, how it stuck to skin and kept burning, kept eating through flesh long after the screaming stopped. How some guys came back with burns that covered half their bodies, burns that never really healed, just turned into scar tissue that pulled and cracked and hurt for the rest of their lives. Bill's rope debt had taught me that you could work off what you owed, that if you hustled hard enough, ran your game long enough, you could pay back even the money you never should have owed in the first place. But I knew guys who'd gone over there. One of them came back in a box. Another one came back but wouldn't talk about it, just sat in his parents' basement and stared at the wall. The debt didn't get paid off. It just kept compounding. The pig rodeo taught me to hold on, to grip tight and ride it out no matter how hard you got thrown around, because eventually everything stops bucking. But you can't ride out incoming fire. You can't just hold on tighter when the mortars start falling. The booby trap taught me that payback evens out, that consequences have an endpoint, that you take your punishment and move on. But in that jungle, the rhythm of payback didn't even out. The holes were real, and the people who fell into them didn't get back up. The punishment didn't end. All those childhood lessons, all that boundary pushing and price paying and surviving, turned out to be just the prologue. The real test was coming, and nothing about riding pigs or setting fires or burying toy cars was going to prepare me for it. But I didn't know that yet. Not really. I folded the letter, put it in my pocket, and told myself I was ready. I wasn't.